Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today on our SSDA webinar. A few housekeeping items before we start. On the right-hand side of your screen, there is a handout box. In there, you'll find a PDF of today's PowerPoint. Please feel free to download that. And then all attendees are muted. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them in the question box, which you'll also see on the right-hand side of your screen. And our presenters will be happy to answer those at the end of the webinar. So with that, I'm going to hand it over now to Cristy and Stephanie and Helio.
All right, hang on, I got the, hello. I got the thing to share my screen, but it now went away. Let me get 1 second.
I did see your screen.
Oh, you did?
Yep.
Let me see what you are seeing. Show screen, give me 1 second, and there we go. And you can see it, correct?
Yep, you're good.
All right. Okay, sorry about that. We've been so used to using Zoom now that now I'm going back to GoToMeeting. It's just a tad bit different. Well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. We are very excited to be partnered with the SSDA to support all of the small school districts and to do what we can as a student information system to assist users with your guys' unique needs and challenges that you are facing as a small school district where one person may play many roles. I know that Corey had sent out a few questions to the districts to see where you guys are kind of maybe struggling or the questions that you have. So we've created this webinar based on your specific needs and based on your feedback. So before we get into our agenda, I would like to introduce Dr. Helio Brasil, the Superintendent of Keys Union School District and your SSDA President.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to this, which I believe will be a great webinar, most certainly for we smalls who wear multiple hats. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that our information is only as good as we absolutely put into that system. SEISS has a mission to provide services that boost efficiency and maximize accuracy for special education record keeping. It's an amazing service, an amazing platform. And now with our having to integrate with CALPADS, their services are needed more so than any other time. I know that everyone is probably working from home. I hope everyone is doing well, that you are staying safe. And I think we're kind of ready for some kind of normal, but what that will be, I think we'll just have to wait and see. Again, thank you for attending, and if we can ever be of any service, just because we're called small school districts doesn't mean that a larger district can't join us or participate in anything we do. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you for that. And then to introduce myself, my name is Cristy Swenson, and I am the SEISS Support Manager. I have been with SEISS for 8 years, managing the SEISS Help Desk and the implementation and training of new SELPAs and new school districts. And then we also have Stephanie Craig on as well, and I'll let her do her introduction.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Craig, and I have worked with public education for about the last 17 years, behind the support desk myself at one point with Aries. I've worked in the school district as an office manager, so I know your pain. And I'm just here today to really support Cristy with this. And again, stay safe, everybody, and we appreciate everything you're doing for our students and our families out there. Back to you, Cristy.
All right, thank you. All right, so on our agenda today, again, based on the feedback that we had received, we will be going over data integration, which is our SEISS to SIS integration service, the transferred student process, an overview of the CALPADS reporting, best practices for the end of the school year, and our new feature that was just released this morning of our electronic signatures. So you guys are getting the first presentation on this. So we're going to start with data integration because this is really where it all begins. Over the past few years, when K-Smith's days, is that they've always said that the data between the student information system and special education need to match. But we didn't really know what that meant until the first CALPADS report. then we're like, oh, we get it. There is now a direct validation between the student information system and the special education information system. So it is really important that that data aligns. So for those of you that are not aware of our nightly integration service, the benefit that it has is amazing. One, it's because it is a nightly automated process. So every night, data can be sent from your student information into SEISS, same as information can be exported from SEISS directly into your student information system. This will allow you to have the best data management because you are alleviating that duplicate entry, which also alleviates that room for error. By having this information update nightly, as you're entering information into your SIS, again, that next day, that information will be in SEISS. And same as you're updating information in SEISS, that information the next day will update your student information system. So instead of trying to develop a workflow of, okay, well, on Monday, I'm going to pull a report from SEISS and pull a report from the SIS and try to do some comparisons to see where things can be off, this is just done for you. So some of the questions that we get are, well, what can we upload? What would make most sense? So for the data upload, there are already 42 standard fields that are included. So that is mainly the student demographic type information, race, ethnicity, date of birth, SSID, parent contact information, and such. Then you have the option to upload 15 additional fields that you want to export from your SIS into SEISS. And these would be the fields that would be more accurate in your SIS. These are fields that would be captured through the registration packets, again, where they would be entered into the SIS prior to SEISS. So those would be things such as school of attendance, parent education level, district of residence, proficiency status, all things, again, that are captured through those registration packets that would be more accurate in the SIS. And of course, you can upload any field that you feel would benefit uploading into SEISS. But again, you would just be selecting the fields that would be more accurate in the SIS. For the download, this one looks a little because we included field names from different information systems. But the download file, you can download any field from the student record. And of course, you would want to download the fields that would be more accurate in SEISS. So anything that is special ed related, such as IEP dates, entry dates, referral fields, initial start dates, exit dates, and such. All of those fields would be more accurate in SEISS. So those are the types of fields that you would want to be exported to update your SIS. Then you know that the information in your SIS updated SEISS, the information in SEISS updated your SIS, and that information is the same and that there wasn't that duplicate entry or a typo or a misselection in a field to just kind of, again, alleviate those types of errors. So if you do have any questions on the integration process, if you haven't heard of this or knew that this was offered, definitely email into the help desk and we can get you over to our integration department where they can get you set up. And then if you want to update any of your download or upload fields, then let us know and we can get that revised for you as well. So we're going to move into transferred students. This process has been around for about the last 4 to 5 months now, and all this information can be found in the Help Center. But because it is a newer process and we still get lots of questions on how to process these transferred students and how to report these types of transactions, we definitely wanted to include this information. So the reason for this change was for 2 things. One is to accurately account for all students enrolled in Census Day in SEISS, and to fulfill the IEP requirement for students that are transferring into the district, as we know that the last reportable transaction from the previous district needs to be reported in the new district. So we all found out on Census Day that there was no way to actually create a Census Day report in SEISS. There was no identifying field that allowed users to see which districts, or I'm sorry, which students were actually enrolled in the district within a specific time frame. So this is why we created the field, the date student enrolled in district LEA. This will allow the districts then to enter the date that is found in the enrollment record of the student, again, to have that data aligned. So when you're focusing on correcting errors for a specific group of students for Census Day or for end of year, and then after the reporting to actually generate a report of those students that were included in the Census Day or year-end report, this date will allow you to do that. Now, they're as simple as that date sounds, that is where all the questions come from. Is what date should we enter into this field? So this date should be the date that is found on the enrollment record for the student. And what we have found out is that at the end of each year, the SIS actually exits or kind of unenrolls the students from the SIS. And then at the beginning of the next year, they re-enroll them. So that new enrollment date is the most up-to-date enrollment date, and that would be the date that we would expect to see in SEISS. Now, some districts or some users have said, well, if they enrolled 2 years ago and they haven't left, is it okay that I leave that date from 2 years ago? That is fine, because the student has not left the district and that student would be included in your Census Day or end of the year report. So the purpose that I'm going to kind of keep stressing throughout the slides is that this field is for you. It is for the districts to be able to create a type of report or a student count. So that is why you just want to make sure that you're using the same process for all students if you're going to use the current enrollment date or the date that they first enrolled in your district. So that way you can accurately, create that report. This is why we created the ability for users to be able to bulk upload student enrollment dates from the SIS. So if you are a district level user, you have the permission to bulk upload enrollment dates, where you can easily pull a file from your SIS. You just pull the enrollment date and then you upload it right into SEISS. And that's it. So that way at the beginning of each school year, you can just download the enrollment dates for your students and upload them into SEISS, and then you don't have to worry about manually updating the enrollment date for every single one of the students. This field is not required. So if for some reason, again, as we put processes in place, as we get feedback from users, we realize that not every process works for every single student in every single situation. So we did just make this field a warning, where if you, for some reason, have added a SEISS record to a student, but they have not been enrolled in the district as of yet, then it's okay. You can leave that field blank. But once there is an enrollment date, you just want to make sure you add it so that student can be captured in any type of report that you run. So it will not prevent a student from being added, from being transferred, from the provider affirming, any of that. For the second reason for the IEP requirement when transferring is you previously knew our transfer copy, where when a student transferred from District A to District B, we just carried over that, whatever the last reportable transaction was, we moved it over to the new district. Well, that wasn't always accurate. We've come to find out that there were numerous times where a student maybe left out of state, had their last IEP out of state, they come back to the school district. Well, if we just pulled over that last reportable transaction, that is not what the new district should be reporting. Or for some reason, a student moved to the neighboring district, but it's a non-SEISS using district. And so they had their last IEP there and they come back to your district. Again, what we were doing of that last reportable transaction wasn't always accurate. So that's why we created the way for district level users to be able to create their own transactions for students when they transfer into the district. And I know that was just a lot of information for one slide. So we're definitely available to answer more in-depth questions at the end of the webinar. So for new students, if the student does not have a SEISS record, and this is the first time they're entering special education, on that add student form is where you will enter the date student enrolled in the district. And again, if you don't have that field or you don't have that date yet because the student hasn't been enrolled, then you do not have to enter a date into this field and you can continue with adding the student record. If the student record is found and you do request that record, on that transfer request page, that is where you will enter the date student enrolled in district. So that's the spot that you would enter the field. And again, if the student has not been enrolled yet, then you do not have to enter that date at this time. Now, when a student is transferring out of the district, you'll notice that we have a lot of validations in place and we keep adding more because we're trying to put in as many safeguards as possible to alleviate CALPADS errors and certification errors that we saw that happened with census day. So when you go to exit a student, we already have the alert in place where if the student had an unaffirmed amendment, that amendment had to be affirmed or deleted prior to releasing the student record. We updated the alert for unaffirmed IEPs and made it a pop-up warning because again, if an IEP was held and it wasn't affirmed, then there's no transaction to report to CALPADS. Affirming IEPs is very, very, very important because again, that is the only way that data is getting to CALPADS. So now we made it a pop-up warning where if there is an unaffirmed IEP, that the IEP is affirmed prior to releasing the record. The most current validation that we put in place is if the student does not have a CALPADS reportable transaction in the district. This is important because if the student is enrolled in the district, but there is no SPED transaction for the student, that's when you're going to get the certification error. So it is important that before you release the record, that if there is a transaction for the student, if there was a meeting that was held, maybe it just hasn't been affirmed yet, that meeting is affirmed. And if the student comes in and that last IEP that they came in with is accurate, maybe they just had their last IEP a month ago, it is up to date and accurate, then you would want to adopt or create a transaction based on that last IEP to get that transaction in your district. And you could think of that as your transfer copy. And then that way, if the student is transferred out prior to you being able to do an intern placement or a 30-day or hold any type of meeting, you have that transaction in the district. So if there is no transaction for the student in the district level user is able to create a transaction for the student. So as I had said, the district level user can go to the student's current IEP and they can take a look at it. And if the meeting information is up to date and accurate, then they can simply click the preview transaction link to review that transaction data. If it all, again, is good, it's up to date, it's accurate, then they would simply click the Adopt Create Transaction button, and that will immediately create a transaction in the district. Now, I know that it's not always the district office that's going to know if an IEP is up to date or not. And the district can work with the case manager or the provider to see if that information is in fact up to date or accurate. And then the district can create that transaction. So it doesn't have to solely be the district user that has to make that determination. With the preview transaction, I know sometimes looking at the CALPADS transaction page can be, a little much. It's just a bunch of data on the page. And sometimes it's a little bit easier to review the IEP forms to see if that data is up to date and accurate. And if that's the case, you're on the current IEP. All you would have to do is just scroll down and view the IEP forms. When you're viewing those IEP forms, if everything looks good, then you can just scroll back up to the top, click the preview transaction link, and then click the Adopt Create Transaction button. So that will put the transaction in the district, and then the record can be released. When the student transfers into the new district, this is where we know that any student who transfers into the district, that last reportable transaction needs to be reported in the new district. But there's a lot of different scenarios of when a student transfers into the district. So we'll go over the 3 scenarios that would happen when a student transfers in. So scenario 1 is the student transfers in, an intern placement's not going to be held. They just transferred from district to district within the CALPA. Their IEP is up to date and accurate. This is following that same process that we just showed for releasing the record. You would simply go to the student's current IEP, click the preview transaction link, and adopt that transaction. That's it. That's the easy part. Where it gets a little bit more complicated is if a student is transferring from outside of the CALPA or maybe within the CALPA, but you're still going to do an intern placement because maybe specific services or such are not offered in your district. So this is where the process has changed a little bit and where we do realize that this is our general process and that there are a lot of different situations and scenarios where this one process may not work in every situation. So we'll cover a couple different situations, and then again, those really unique situations you can email into the SEISS help desk where we can do any additional research as needed. So if a student is transferring from outside of the CALPA or you will be holding an intern placement meeting, you're going to go to the student's future IEP and complete the intern placement form. That intern placement form has been completely revised to include all of the CALPADS fields, and it also still includes the last placement to document the last meeting date and last meeting type. Now, I know this is a huge change from what we have normally told you to do of creating the intern placement as an amendment to the current IEP. The reason why you have to go to the future IEP now is that not all amendments create transactions. So what was happening is students were transferring into the district, amendments were being held, and then the student would transfer out, but it didn't create a reportable transaction. So then you got caught in the certification error of no SPED transaction for the student. And then we would have to go back and kind of manually create these CALPADS transactions for these students. So by doing it on the future IEP, when it's affirmed, we'll create that IEP transaction, but using that last meeting date, last meeting type is not going to create a duplicate transaction in the district because, again, you can still think of this as your transfer copy because that information, that meeting date, meeting type would have carried over to your new district. So when you are updating that intern placement form, you are using the information based on that active, hard copy IEP if that is what you have. Since you are doing the intern placement on the future IEP, you would not, and that's why it's in red, would not go to the information eligibility form to update the meeting date and meeting type, because that would just overwrite that information. And this is not a full meeting. This is just your intern placement that you're documenting. So you would just go to the future IEP, update the intern placement form with that last meeting date, meeting type, and not go to the information eligibility form. And then when you affirm the intern placement, that is when you can attach that hard copy to, or attach the hard copy as an attachment to that now current IEP. The next question that we get from there is always about the students that transferred out of state. Well, that doesn't really work going to the future IEP. So you are right. This is one of those scenarios where it just really kind of doesn't work out. So you can still use that initial CALPADS Affirm process to document the student's active IEP and SEISS. Again, the whole point of this is just to get the IEP transaction in the district. That's it. So if it means that you have to do that initial CALPADS Affirm by entering that data onto the future IEP of their last placement, affirming, now you have that IEP transaction, and then doing that 30-day or that interim as an amendment to that IEP transaction, that is okay, because you have that IEP transaction now, and if that amendment for some reason is not reportable, you still have that needed transaction. For the information on the initial CALPADS Affirm process, that can be found in the Help Center in SEISS. under the training materials and under best practices. So if you want to see how that process works, this will show you how to document that intern placement for those out of state or students that came from a non-SEIS district. So for the students that have transferred into the district where they were exited in their previous district, or they were D&Q'd with a plan type 700, 800, or 900, well, this is just your initial assessment. The student was previously exited, they're being re-referred, and so you are going to go to the student record and update their referral information as you normally would. We just wanted to reiterate that exit reasons 71, 74, 76, and 77 are not considered an exit from special education, so you definitely would want to review their last or their current IEP. But then you would just click on the student record icon to be directed to the CALPADS student page and select plan type 300, which is for pending initial evaluation, and select meeting type 30, again, which is for pending initial evaluation. That way, this student is now documented that they received parent consent, they're waiting for that initial assessment, and if it does happen to go over census day or end of year, those are the criteria that we are going to use to find those students that are pending and to report those to CALPADS as, again, pending initial evaluation. So it is important that those fields are selected. So we're going to go into CALPADS reporting, and I know some of this information, if you're avid SEIS users and you've been using it for a long time, we're going back a little bit. Some of the feedback that we saw was who does what, who's responsible for what, how does this workflow kind of work, where do I find CALPADS information? So that's why we updated these slides to kind of, again, answer those questions for you. So for the CALPADS reporting, I mean, of course, this was a paradigm shift for everybody. I mean, how you worked and who did what. It's not just small school districts that, you know, were concerned. Large school districts, SEIS, everybody is who is really supposed to be doing what and who's responsible for what. So when we reached out to CALPADS, you know, for many of these questions to get their take on it, so we can provide this information to people as well. And so CALPADS, the CALPADS folks still have their CALPADS roles. You know, you're still working with the SIS, pulling those files and records and submitting them to CALPADS. It's the special ed person for the CALPADS special ed reporting that's responsible for that special ed data. The special ed person, the data technician, is the one that should be generating the reports, that should have that CALPADS login to submit that data. We've got a lot of, well, it would just be easier if the CALPADS person went into SEIS and submitted that data for them. But that's just a click of a button. It's that SEIS person that has that special education background or that program expertise. They're the ones who can reach out to the case managers for error corrections and any updates as needed. So it's not the CALPADS person that should be in SEIS to be generating those reports. It should be the special ed person. Of course, if you are the same person, then that's a different story. Then you will be doing both. But again, the information on how to generate those reports, if you are new to submitting special ed CALPADS reports, all this information can be found in SEIS in the Help Center as well. But the main thing is that, again, we knew that the special ed and the CALPADS person was going to need to work together, but it wasn't really clear on how that was supposed to work until it actually became a thing, until now. And now we know, this is a slide that we actually pulled from one of the CALPADS webinars, and they kind of broke it out as this is how you're working together. Your CALPADS person is the one that is still managing the CALPADS data. They're working in the SIS. The special ed person is who's working in SEIS. They're resolving the errors. They're working with SEIS if they have any questions. They're working with the case managers. But the reason why they need to work together is because data has to be reported and submitted in a specific way. So we are all aware of that lovely, the GR05, where there's no enrollment date for the special ed student. So it is important that the CALPADS coordinator submits those enrollment records first. That is where the workflow between the special ed and the CALPADS will kind of work together to determine who's going to do what and when. So all of the CALPADS files and reports would be uploaded first, and then the special ed data gets reported afterwards. So if there is no enrollment record for the student, that is when you're going to get the errors on the special ed side of saying that there is no enrollment record for the student. That will also result in a certification error where you're missing an enrollment record for a student with a SPED record. So that's just why it's important that you guys still have your own roles of what you have been doing. It's just this little piece of information of when to upload your files and making sure those enrollment dates are correct to alleviate kind of the confusion of those errors of no enrollment record for the student. As we move into, so that was more of the workflow. Now we're going to kind of go into how are these transactions even created? What exactly is a transaction, and what are we reporting? So what constitutes a transaction? Anytime an IEP is affirmed, and we know that an IEP can only be affirmed if it's an initial, an annual, or a triennial, that will be your IEP transaction. When a student is exited from special education, with the exception of the following codes, that will create an exit transaction to be reported to CALPADS. Some of the exit reasons are only reported through the SIS. Not every exit reason is reported through special ed. When a student's status is changed to D&Q, where they're either do not qualify or they just will not be receiving services, that will create a D&Q transaction. When the student's plan type is changed to 300, so this one has kind of gone back and forth where CALPADS only wants to know the students that are pending either on census day or end of year. So we're not creating those pending transactions throughout the entire year, because very well within the next 60 days, they're going to have an initial evaluation. So it is important though that once you do receive parent consent that their plan type is 300 and their meeting type is 30. So that way when we go to pull that data, we can capture those students as pending. And then lastly, as we had discussed, that when specific fields in an amendment are updated, that will create an amendment transaction. So even though this sounds like a lot of new information, all of this is done on the back end. There was no change to the teachers. There was no change to the districts. This is just what we are doing to create those transactions for you. The only thing that's important is that the case managers are affirming IEPs and amendments as soon as the meetings are completed, and that they are submitting those student change forms to request that an eligibility status be changed, or to indicate that a student is exiting or is transferred to another school district, because that is the only way that that data is going to be captured and reported. For your reference, these are the fields that will kind of indicate that an amendment reportable transaction will be created. So what we do is when an amendment is affirmed, that night we run a validation to see if any of these fields have changed from the current IEP. If any one of these fields were updated, that's when we create that amendment transaction. So as you can see, it's not all CALPADS fields. So that's why some students were being transferred out even though an amendment was held and no amendment transaction was created, therefore resulting in that certification error. So for your CALPADS resources, we did have some feedback about where do I find the definitions for these errors? They're so confusing. I don't know how to fix them. Is there a way that I can see how the CALPADS, I help my special ed person, is there a way that I can see how the CALPADS reporting process works in SEISS? Where can I find this information? So any CALPADS information that we have received, we upload to the Help Center. So in the Help Center, under Training Materials, we have a CALPADS section. And I've highlighted the most commonly viewed documents as these are your certification errors. The CALPADS errors along with their definitions and their suggested resolutions. The CALPADS reporting process guide is the help guide that we put together to show you step by step how to generate a CALPADS report, how to post your errors, and how to do the entire process. At the very bottom, the CALPADS reporting process for the CSE 2019, that is what we presented at last year's CSC conference, not the SEIS conference anymore. So that was our session materials, which is nice because it is more like a webinar style and it includes a little bit more information. So if you want a nice overview of the CALPADS and special ed kind of merge, definitely review that information. So moving on to the post-secondary search. The post-secondary report is currently being programmed in SEIS. So once that report is available, of course, we will alert all users and provide you with the information on how that report will function. But from what I've seen, it's going to function just like the current CALPADS report. It will just be a separate page because it's a separate data set. But what you can do now is start gathering that post-secondary data. CALPADS wants to know, what are the students doing now? Are they receiving higher education? Are they in the military? Are they employed? What are they doing? So in our FAQs, you can find the search criteria to find those students that should be included in the post-secondary report. We recommend that you save and share this search just because this is a lot of criteria and you definitely don't want to keep recreating the search over and over again. If you choose to mail out surveys, then from this search, you can easily download mailing labels to send out those surveys unless you're getting your information through a different source. And once you get that information back, which is why we want to have this search saved, is because you will only see the CALPADS post-secondary page for exited students. So having the search saved will allow you to go directly back to that student, click on the student record icon, and click on the CALPADS post-secondary page. The only editable field on the page is the post-secondary status field. So you just make the appropriate selection and click save, and that is it. That is how you enter the data onto that page. As I had said, we are currently working on that report, but under the report section of the upper navigation bar, there will be a report for post-secondary report. What we're going to do on this one, because you're only making a selection in a field, making a selection in a field and saving is not generating any type of transaction. So what we're going to do is once that report is available, we are going to actually generate the report for everybody. Now, generating the report does not mean that there will be any data in the report. It just means that we're generating it for you because only students that have a selection made in that field will pull into the report. But how it's going to work is every day as you're entering data onto that post-secondary page, that night, we will gather that data, create a transaction, and insert it into that post-secondary report. That's how those transactions will be generated. So all you need to do is just enter that data on the post-secondary page, and the next day, you'll see those transactions in the report, and then you'll just upload to CALPADS like you normally do. You log in, submit the file, retrieve the errors, and correct the errors, and then resubmit once you're error-free. So that part will work exactly the same. And again, we'll provide more detailed information once that report is available. All right, so let's go into some best practices. It's for end of year and just best practices in general because we get a ton of questions on these specific things. So one, students that are exiting at the end of the year. So any student that will not be returning for the next school year must be exited prior to June 30th. We found with the Census Day report that there are tons and tons of students that were exited maybe come the beginning of the next school year. When the district got back in session in August, then they went in and exited out all of their seniors. Well, now that everything is transactional, if you are to exit your students after July 1st, they will not be accounted for your year-end report because those transactions are now after July 1st. So you definitely want to make sure that any student that is not going to return the next year, that they are exited prior to June 30th. The exit dates and reasons can be bulk updated, but the students have to be individually exited, of course, to make sure that there are no CALPADS errors. So you can easily just run a search to find those students that are going to graduate or not return the next year. And then from the bulk update page, you would just select date of exit from special ed, enter the date, exit reason, whatever is appropriate for that group of students, and then that information will be applied to those student records. The next question that comes after this is, well, what if the student is graduating, but they're going to receive ESY services? When should we exit those records? You always want to exit the record when the student is actually exiting special education. You're not going to want to exit them on June 15th, but they're going to continue to receive services until July 15th. So therefore, the student would be exited at the end of ESY. When we reached out to CALPADS, because a lot of districts had questions like, oh, wait, but we exit all these students on their last day of school, then that information is not going to match. And they said that students can be exited in the SIS up until August 15th. So there should not be any conflict between the SIS and SEISS for those exit dates. So definitely the students should not be exited until they actually stop receiving services, whatever that date is. For students that are assessed at the end of the school year, but they will not start until the fall. CALPADS days, or I'm sorry, case miss days are long in the past of where you would keep the student pending or project out the initial start date to next year so they wouldn't be pulled into the case miss report. That is not the case any longer. When the meeting is held and eligibility is determined and agreed upon, that is the start date for the student, even if they are not going to start until the fall. So if the student was assessed today, they're found eligible, everybody agrees, today is their initial start date. So that is the date that you would use in this field. This one kind of doesn't necessarily relate to end of year, but we get this question a lot, and so we definitely wanted to include it, is we get the question of, you had your initial evaluation, the parent maybe wanted to review the information, they haven't consented or declined, but it's now been a few weeks, it's now been 2 months. At what point can you make a change to the student, or are they just going to stay pending until when? So when we reached out to CALPADS for some guidance, they were a little bit loose on it really is up to the LEA. It's really up to their legal department, because there could be situations where there isn't really an official timeline or deadline when a change needs to be made. But they said that it shouldn't exceed a month. If it's been a month and you've been doing what you can to try to reach that common ground, or you can't get a hold of them and it's been over 30 days, at that point, that is a reasonable time of where you can change the student's plan type to 800 and D&Q them. But again, coming back with, you may want to follow up with your legal department to see if there's anything else that needs to be done. You don't want to just wait 30 days and then just change them. You kind of, each student is a little bit different, but the guidance from them, where a lot of people were asking, is, well, how many days? And so they did say that process really just shouldn't exceed a month. Another big one is an annual and a triennial is held, but the provider accidentally only selected annual for the meeting. What do? Now there's only an annual transaction. In this case, we did create an FAQ for this if you need to go back and review this as well. But if for some reason only annual was selected, you would need to go back to the future IEP, select triennial, and reaffirm. So that way that both meeting types and the future IEP is all accurate and up to date. You do not just want to update through an amendment, because that will not create an amendment transaction. So then therefore that wouldn't even be reported. You have to go back to the future IEP, select the appropriate meeting types, and then reaffirm. But then now you have a duplicate annual transaction. So then you will have to go back and mark that duplicate annual do not report, so that you don't get the duplicate transaction error. All right, deleting services. So again, previously with CASEMIS, it was always said that because there was only 2 reporting periods, that all services needed to be remain on the service grid until the June 30th CASEMIS report, then they can be deleted as of July 1st. That is no longer the case. When a service is discontinued, it should not be reported. That is over reporting your services. And now that each IEP transaction is being submitted, there is no reason to hold on discontinued services to be reported with the next IEP transaction. This is why when a service is discontinued, by clicking the discontinue button, we automatically mark it do not report. So that way it does not get pulled into the CALPADS transaction. So there was the instance where you have the providers that are exiting a student from special education, so they are discontinuing all of the services like they should, but then therefore all the services are marked do not report, and now there are no services for the student. To make matters, I guess you could say worse, is that CALPADS, for exit transactions, they want all services that were being provided up until the student exited included in that exit transaction. So we could not keep those services marked do not report, because they had to be reported with the exit. So we do an extra validation that if all services are marked do not report on the page, that we will unmark those services do not report. So that way, when the student is exited, those services will be included in that exit transaction. So to find those services that have been discontinued and that can be removed from the services grid, you can easily run a search. You can do the start date and end date, whichever you choose. Some providers have kept services on for a very long time. So you can use a start date of 1/1/1900, and then you can use the end date of today's date. And then you'll select current service report, and the current service report has the status column where you can sort to put the discontinued at the top. And then you can share the search with your teachers, because it's the teachers and the case managers that should be the ones deleting these services, because maybe the service was accidentally discontinued or they accidentally put in the incorrect end date. So they should be the ones to review this information. You're just helping them by gathering this information and sharing the search with them. Another good search to run is to verify your students that are marked do not report. This was a big one when we moved from kind of CASEMIS to CALPADS, as all the students that were marked do not report were not included in the census day report. And again, that's where we had to manually create all of those transactions. So definitely run, it's an easy search to run, do not report equals yes. And then you can insert any columns that you want to really kind of see if that student should be marked do not report or not. So if you have a plan type of 100 and you can see that they were just prepping for a meeting and their last meeting was affirmed, last year as expected, you may want to question why that student is marked do not report. So just an easy search to run to make sure that all students are accounted for. Another one is for your pending students. This is a huge one, as when we go out and do trainings now, we really have everybody take a look at this, because pending students are not reported unless they're a pending plan type 300. So if you go to, this is not even a search you have to run, it's right on your homepage. If you just click on your pending students, or click on students on the upper navigation bar and click on pending students, the only students you should see in there are your students that have a referral date, a parent consent date, and a plan type of 300, or just a referral date because we haven't received parent consent yet to know if they're pending an initial evaluation. If you have any students that have a plan type, first of all, an initial evaluation date and a plan type of eligible, which would be 100 or 200 or 150, or DNQ, then a meeting occurred, a determination was made, but their status has not been changed, which means if they were found eligible, that IEP has not been affirmed yet, so that information is not being reported to CALPADS, or the student needs to be DNQ'd to create that DNQ transaction. If they're still pending 300 with an initial evaluation date, then we just need to figure out what the outcome of that meeting was to have their plan type and eligibility updated accordingly. And again, also on your homepage, just really important, everybody has access to this, even the all of the providers, is really keeping an eye on your unaffirmed IEPs and your unaffirmed amendments. These are meetings that have already been held and they just have not been affirmed yet. So these are the easiest ones to capture because the work's already done. The meetings have already been held. So it's just the follow-up with those case managers to see why those IEPs and amendments have not been affirmed yet. All right, and I apologize if I was talking a little quickly. I know that we have a time frame to stick within, and I don't want to take up more time that's needed. But this is going into our electronic signature feature now. Again, it was released this morning, and all this information you can find right on your SEISS homepage or in the Help Center. So with the electronic signature feature, what we really want to stress is that this is phase one. This distant learning was kind of sprung on everybody. And then everybody was still required to hold meetings, and there's no way to obtain a signature. So we did, our focus and our priority was to be able to allow providers to obtain those signatures for meetings that have already been held, and again, to get that signature. So we are definitely releasing additional enhancements in a phase two that will include additional information or additional options, such as being able to get a signature for an amendment or being able to obtain a signature for single forms, such as a meeting notice, assessment plan, prior written notice, and such. As of now, as of today, the feature is to again, allow the ability to obtain a signature for a completed meeting. So since the meeting is completed, everything should be locked in place. You're sending that electronic signature to all of the signers. Therefore, you should not be updating any information on the IEP or the student record because the signer should be signing the information that was discussed at that meeting, not with any additional updates that occurred afterwards. So you will notice that the IEP and the student record will be disabled. So you won't be able to edit the IEP forms, an amendment, update progress, or update the student record or transfer out a student if the electronic signature is in process. Now that process time is only 7 days. So the signatures have to be obtained within 7 days or the package will expire. And then the case manager or whoever created the electronic signature package will just have to create a new one because we just definitely don't want them pending for 30 days or months at a time. So the process is very self-explanatory and very simple. So once that meeting has been completed, you simply select the forms that were included in that meeting and you click the Generate e-signature package button. When you click that button, we'll run a couple validations to make sure that nobody is on the IEP forms, to make sure that there's no unaffirmed amendments, and to make sure that the student doesn't have any CALPADS errors, because again, everything's going to be locked in place. If you pass that validation, you're going to get a congratulations pop-up, and you just click continue. That will direct you to the signers module, where you will enter the signers information. So at this time, you can add up to 8 signers, and you enter the signer's name, their title, email, and cell phone, and then make sure you click the Add Signer button, or I'm sorry, the Add Signer icon. Then you're going to enter a password The reason why we have the cell phone and the password again is we have to make this secure. And so doing the email, the text message, and the password is going to allow for the security measures to kind of authenticate that only the intended recipients have access to this information. If the user does not have a cell phone number, then the provider would just have to share the password directly with that person or that user or that recipient. It will show you the forms that were included in the e-signature package, and then you're just going to check the box to acknowledge that everything is correct, email addresses, phone numbers, forms, and then click the Send e-signature package button. If for some reason after you send it, you realize, oh no, I forgot to make these updates before I sent out the package, or I needed to include additional forms, you can easily cancel by clicking the Cancel e-signature package button. And then you can enter a reason for the cancellation. Once it's canceled, the recipients will not be able to access the electronic signature package to be able to sign because now that has expired the link. This is what the signers will see. So this is kind of what they will see. They will get the text message along with the password and a separate email to be able to access this document. What you'll see here on the left are all of the IEP forms. They'll scroll down. This is the information. It's just a PDF of what was in SEISS. And then at the bottom of the page is their consent, where they can agree or decline or put in with an exception. And if it's a team member that it was sent to, then they can just select non-applicable because they're a team member. And then they just sign and click Submit Signature. So that's all that the signers or the parent or whoever is signing has to do. Very simple. They scroll and view, consent, sign, and submit. Okay, let me go ahead and see here. Once signed, then that will, the signers will see this page saying that you've completed signing. And if you want to view the PDF, then you can click the download PDF link, and that will show whoever signed a PDF copy of what they had just signed. And then you can follow up on the e-signature process on your homepage. So this is, I think this was my favorite feature of it, is that when you go on your homepage in the follow-up section and click on electronic signatures, you can click on the view e-signature details icon, and that will show you the status of every single signer. So you can see that one person has viewed it, it's been sent to one person, they haven't opened it yet, or this person has signed. So you can see the status of each signer. And then you can add any additional comments as needed, and then click Save, and that will display on your homepage notice. All right, and I know we have one question here, but I have 2 more slides, and then I can get to that last question. So once everything's been completed, once all signatures have been obtained, that follow-up notice, the status will change to completed. The status will say signed for that specific signer. And then you can click the view, go to view e-signed document, and that will take you to the student's IEP or IFSP to view that signed document. You will also get a message to the help center, to the message center saying that all the signatures have been obtained for the student, and you can click on the student IEP's page to be directed again to their IEP or IFSP to view that signed document. So this is what it would look like on the student's future IEP. They just click on the View e-signed document button. They can download and view the signed document. If for some reason, if everything's good and you can continue on to the Affirm process, just click the Affirm button. You're already error-free, and you just continue with the Affirm. If for some reason you need to void the e-signature package because changes needed to be made, then you would just enter a void reason and click the void button, and then that will void the signatures and send an email to the recipient saying that the signatures have been voided. And once the IEP or ISP has been affirmed, that signed document will automatically attach to the current IEP. So that will automatically be attached, and this is what the signature page would look like. You will have a section for each signer, when they sign, time and date, and with what their consent was. And so again, that will automatically be attached. And if for some reason the student was pending, and maybe this was their initial, and the student was found to not be eligible for special education, if the provider is going, if it's the provider that is viewing the document, they will have the option to be directed right to the student change form to request that the student's status be changed to ineligible. And if it's an admin level user clicking the button, then they will be directed right to the student record, to the eligibility section, to update the student's eligibility. And once that status is changed to D&Q, that signed PDF will automatically be attached to the ineligible copy on the history page of the student record. So if you were to go to their IEP history page, you can see that there is an attachment tied to there, and then you can view that signed document there. And for the Help Center, the best part is that we are here for you. We are here to answer any questions that you have. As we explained, we have, if there's a frequently asked question, it's in our FAQs. Any training materials, anything that we come out with where there's a new process, that's included in the Help Center in our training materials. And we are still all working. It may all be from home, but you can email us or call us, and we are here to answer your questions, most definitely. I do see that we have one question, so I'm going to go ahead and get to that. For anybody who has to sign off quickly, I do want to say thank you so much for allowing us to provide this webinar to you, because we do know that it was really important and that there was a lot of questions that needed to be answered. So we were definitely happy to do this. Let me go ahead and grab this question.
Can you see the question, or you need me to read it out to you?
Oh, I don't see the question, actually.
Sure. So the question was, is there an ETA on when phase 2 will be released? We're currently looking at DocuSign for the fall and would like to hold off if this is coming over the summer.
Our phase 2, the reason why, well, I don't have an exact ETA on it, but how fast we work, I'm sure that it will be done rather quickly. We are in the process right now of doing the CALPADS data cleanup for that whole SPED 3075 error with those duplicate transactions. So we are in the midst of all hands on deck doing that data cleanup, and then we're jumping into phase 2. So as I don't have an ETA, I highly doubt it will go past the summer. So as we have a better ETA, I mean, definitely email into the help desk, because maybe next week I'll have a better idea of when it will be released. But I don't have an ETA now, but I know that as soon as this data cleanup is done, that we're moving right into work for phase 2. So I hope that helps answer that question.
I think so. And then let's see. Yep, they said thank you, so I would say yes. So I'm just looking. Doesn't look like we have any other. Oh, hey, got another one. Yes. Oh, yes. So somebody had asked about a PDF of the webinar. So that's actually, as I mentioned before we started, there's a handout section on the right-hand side. If you want to grab the PDF of the PowerPoint real quick before we sign off today. If you didn't get a chance to download it, I will be sending that out along with a link to the recording of today's session. I'll be sending that out tomorrow morning after GoToWebinar processes it and sends me the little link saying it's ready. And then this way you guys can also share it with anybody who may have missed today, or if somebody registered and wasn't able to make it, they'll get a recording of this. And then let's see, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. If you have any questions, as Cristy said, feel free to contact their help desk. You can also email me at Corrie, C-O-R-R-I-E @ssda.org. And I'd be more than happy to connect you with Cristy or Stephanie and forward them any questions you may have.
Corey, I just wanted to also thank Cristy and Stephanie for putting on a great presentation and for all of their hard work and willingness to support our district. So thank you very much to both of you.
Hi, you're welcome.
Oh, you're very welcome. We're happy to do it. That's certain.
Well, thank you guys so much for being our presenters today, and thank you to everybody for attending, and I wish you all a great rest of your week.
All right, thank you.
And thank you, Corey.
Of course. Bye-bye.